Hey, how's it going everyone? My name is Kevin, welcome back to my channel, and in this video I want to show you guys how to use another vulnerability scanning tool called Nessus. So Nessus is an easy to use scanning tool that major companies use to scan their environment for potential vulnerabilities and remediate them. In a previous video, I talked about how the objective of a vulnerability management program is to essentially reduce the number of vulnerabilities that a company has to an appropriate level, and it's an ongoing process because new vulnerabilities are discovered almost daily. Vulnerability management is a great skill to learn and can potentially be a great entry point into cybersecurity. So the more tools you learn, the better chances you'll have at landing a role. You could also add this project to your portfolio or your resume, and it's going to look something like this. So in a real-world scenario, the vulnerability scanning tool will be running outside of your workstation, such as a server, and you'll be accessing it through the server's IP address and port number. To simulate this, I'm going to be installing Nesus Essentials on a Raspberry Pi. If you don't know what a Raspberry Pi is, this is what it is. It's a single board computer, but it essentially acts like a computer, but just smaller, and it uses a lot less resources. If you don't have one, it's totally fine. You can still continue with this lab. You'll just be installing it in your own workstation. And in the lab, I'm going to show you guys how to do that. We're also going to be installing a Linux virtual machine so we can perform a credentialed scan, as well as a printer. So if you have a printer, you can perform a scan in there as well. Essentially, you can just scan your home network for any kind of vulnerabilities. As a disclaimer, please only scan a network that you have explicit permission to do so. Scanning a network that you do not own or have permission to scan can result in legal consequences. So with that out of the way, let's begin. So the first thing that we're going to do is install the Raspberry Pi OS into a micro SD card. And in order to do that, we're going to use the Raspberry Pi imager. So you're going to go and click download, whichever operating system you use, and then install it. Once you install it, go ahead and open it up, and you're going to get a window that looks just like this. You're going to pick the OS. We're going to go for the Raspberry Pi OS 64-bit. We're going to choose the storage for the micro SD card. I'm using a 64 gigabyte, but if you have a 32 gigabyte, that's fine too. But the more storage, the better. After that, we're going to go and click the gear icon, and we're going to make some configurations for the Raspberry Pi OS installer. We're going to set the host name, change it to, well, whatever you want really. I'm going to name mine Slendy Pi. We are going to enable SSH. That's going to be the method that we're going to use to remote into it. We're going to use a password authentication. I'm going to choose my name as well as the password. If you want to run your Raspberry Pi wirelessly, then go ahead and check mark this and put in your home network's Wi-Fi configuration. Then go ahead and click save. I'm going to have mine connected directly to the router, so I'm just going to go ahead and uncheck this, hit save, and then write. If you want to take this step a little bit further and learn how to boot from an SSD, I recommend watching CrossTalk Solutions video on how to boot it, how to make a Raspberry Pi boot to an SSD. You're going to see vast improvements, like in terms of performance on the Raspberry Pi. It isn't necessary, but it is recommended. Once you have it installed, just go ahead and put the micro SD card into your Raspberry Pi, power it on, and let it connect to the network. Once it's powered on and connected to your home network, just use a network scanning tool or like an app in order to find the IP address of the Raspberry Pi. Once you find the IP address of your Raspberry Pi, we're going to go ahead and use PowerShell. And we are going to do SSH, the username at the IP address. You're going to put in the password, and now you are connected. Who am I? Slendy. Hostname. Well, the hostname's right there, you can see. So now we're going to go ahead and install the Nessus into our Raspberry Pi. You're going to go ahead and go to the Nessus website, and you're going to see a web page like this. For the platform, it's going to automatically pick the operating system that your computer is using. If you're not using a Raspberry Pi for this project, it's totally fine. Go ahead and download whichever platform that you're using. Click download, I agree, and then install it. But if you're using a Raspberry Pi, you're gonna go here, scroll up until you see the Raspberry Pi installer, which is gonna be right here. Raspberry Pi OS, ARM HF, and we're gonna be downloading it by curl. So we're gonna go ahead and copy this. We're gonna go back to our Raspberry Pi terminal and copy this, hit run, hit enter, and then it's going to start downloading it to your Raspberry Pi. All right, once it's done downloading, you're gonna do ls just to make sure it's there. So now we're going to install Nessus into our Raspberry Pi. We're gonna do dpackage -i Nessus and just put NE and then tab so autocomplete, and then hit run. Whoops, gotta do sudo. There we go. Sudo dpackage. Just gonna do up. I'm sorry about that, guys. Sudo dpackage, and there we go. Now it's installing. There we go. So now we just got to start it. System control start Nessus d.service. Put in your admin password, and there we go. System control. Now we're gonna make sure it's running. So status Nessus D, and there we go. Active, running, and I think the port that it was running in, there we go, 8834. So over here, back to our web browser, we're gonna put in that IP address. We're gonna put in the IP address of our Raspberry Pi, followed by the port of the Nessus. So we're gonna do 192.168.1.9, port 8034. I think we're gonna have to do it with HTTP or S actually. / HTTPS. Whoops, I am forgetting how to URL. There we go. We're gonna go ahead and click advance, proceed. All right, and now we're in. We just gotta wait for Nessus to initialize. Usually this takes a little bit. Just go ahead and wait and be patient, and then you're gonna see a login window. So if you don't have a Raspberry Pi, it is totally fine. You can just install it on your host machine. Just go ahead and click download, hit I agree, and you're going to go ahead and install it once it finishes downloading. So we're going to hit next, hit install, go yes. And once it installs, it's going to automatically run. You're going to connect it via SSL, and you're just going to proceed it with localhost, and that's it. Once Nessus finishes initializing, you're going to see this page. You're going to go ahead and click continue. You're going to click on register for Nesus Essentials. Click continue. Here you're going to put in your own information, your own email. Once you do, you're going to get an email with an activation code. I already have one, so I'm going to skip this. But once you click register, you're going to get an email with the activation code. You're going to go and put it right here. Click continue. Click continue one more time. And here's where we're going to put the account information for your own Nessus server. So I'm going to put mine as this and put in my own password. And then click continue. I would recommend saving this somewhere because if you for some reason forget this information, it's a little bit complicated to reactivate that. Now we just wait for Nessus to download all the plugins, and that's it. Once that finishes, you're going to see this web page. However, it's still going to be downloading more plugins. This step, it does take a little bit. I remember last time it took me about almost an hour, so just kind of be patient. Once all the plugins are downloaded, you are essentially done and you have a fully functional Nessus server in your own home network. So while the plugins download, we're just going to go ahead and start creating our Ubuntu virtual machine. So I recommend using an obsolete version of Ubuntu just so you can see more vulnerabilities on it. We're going to go here, and then we're going to download the Ubuntu AMD 64 ISO. So once the ISO is done downloading, we're going to go to VirtualBox. We're going to hit New. We're going to name it Old Ubuntu. Here for the ISO, we're going to put in our Ubuntu ISO. We're gonna check mark skip the unattended installation because if you do an unattended installation for a Linux virtual machine, for some reason you don't have sudo privileges. So we're going to go ahead and do that manually. For hardware, we're going to keep everything low. Linux doesn't really use a lot of resources, so 2 gigabytes, 1 CPU should be just fine. Hard disk, that's fine, leave it as is. We're going to finish, and then we're going to go ahead and power it on. Once it's fully powered on, we're going to go ahead and click Install Ubuntu. Keep everything as is. We're going to continue. Normal installation, we'll do minimal. Uncheck this, that's totally fine. Click continue. Erase disk, install now. We're gonna click continue. Pick wherever you want it to be. Here's where we're going to put in our information. So we'll do this Sunday. And now we wait for Ubuntu to install into our virtual machine. All right, once Ubuntu finishes installing, we're going to go ahead and click Restart Now. While it restarts, we're going to go to Settings on our old Ubuntu virtual machine. We're going to go to Network, and we're going to change it from NAT to Bridge Adapter. Click OK, and that way our virtual machine can connect to our home network. Once you're in, you're going to go ahead and log in. Once you fully log in, just go ahead and click Next, 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 click Done. And now we're going to open up our terminal. So now we're going to install SSH into our Ubuntu virtual machine. That way our Nessus server can remotely go into our virtual machine and perform a credential scan. So we're going to do sudo apt install open SSH server. Put in our sudo password. Click yes. So now we're going to enable it. Sudo system control enable SSH. There we go. And just in case the firewall is blocking it, we're going to allow it. So we're going to do sudo ufw allow SSH. There we go. And just to test this out, we are going to go into PowerShell, and then we're going to try to SSH into our Ubuntu machine. Right now, we're connecting to our virtual machine as if it's a desktop. So now we're going to remote into it. So we're going to do SSH Slendy at one. Oh, we don't even know what the IP address is. Quick check. We're going to do wired settings. Right to the settings, and it's 192.168.1.12. So 192.168.1.12. Yes. There we go. As you can see, the host name that we assigned it was Slendy VirtualBox, and this is Slendy VirtualBox, just to make sure. Yep, there it is. Boom. So now our Linux virtual machine is ready to be scanned. Chances are, if you finish setting up your Ubuntu VM, the Nessus still is not done downloading all of the remaining plugins. Totally fine. Just go ahead and be patient. But for me, I have movie magic, so I'm just gonna go ahead and do a quick cut to get to the point where Nessus is fully done and ready to scan. Once the plugins are done downloading and compiling, you are going to get this page. We're gonna go ahead and not put in the targets just yet. Just click X, and now we can perform our very first scan. We're going to create a new scan. We're gonna do a basic network scan. We're gonna do a non-credentialed scan first. So for those who didn't watch my previous video, there's the difference between a credentialed scan and a non-credentialed scan. A non-credentialed scan essentially just scans for open ports, and you get very surface level information, while a credentialed scan allows you to have a more in-depth scan for vulnerabilities of the target. We are going to go ahead and give it a name for the scan. So we're just gonna do non-credentialed Ubuntu scan. And here we're going to put in the IP address of the target, 192.168.1.12. And we're not going to put in any credentials. We're going to click save. And now we're going to launch it. So after it finished running the scan, we're going to click on it. And it looks like it's discovered a total of 19 vulnerabilities. We're going to go and click on the vulnerabilities tab, and here you see a list of the vulnerabilities. Because it didn't go too in depth, most of the vulnerabilities that were identified were just informational. As you can see, it did detect that it was running SSH. It looks like one of the vulnerabilities is that the SSH, it's using SHA-1 signature. Nothing too crazy, nothing too critical, but now let's go ahead and perform a credentialed scan. We're going to go back to my scans. We're going to create a new one. We're going to do a basic network scan. We're going to give it a name. We're going to do credentials. Credentialed Ubuntu scan. Same target, 192.168.1.12. And now we're going to do credentials. Because this is a Linux machine, we're going to do SSH. For authentication, it's just going to be password. The username is going to be the username. It has to be a user with sudo privileges. So let's do the one that we created. Give it the password, escalate the privileges. We're going to give it sudo privileges. The sudo user is going to be this person, and the password is going to be the sudo password, and this is going to be left alone. This is going to be left alone. We're going to hit save, and here we are going to perform a credentialed scan. This one may take a lot longer than a non-credentialed scan because it does go more in depth, and we just got to be patient for it. Now that it finished running the credentialed scan, we're going to click on this, and as you can see, there is a massive difference. Looks like there are 49 critical vulnerabilities, 134 high vulnerabilities, 44 medium, and 3 low vulnerabilities. We can go ahead and click on the vulnerabilities so we can get more information. Here we go, canonical Ubuntu Linux, multiple issues. So instead of throwing you a giant list of vulnerabilities, kind of like what Qualys does, Nessus kind of pockets them into kind of folders where you can kind of look at them in a little bit more detail, kind of keep things a little bit more organized. So we're going to see the canonical Ubuntu Linux, and it looks like a lot of these are related to the Ubuntu version. Yeah, so it looks like it's running Ubuntu 18.04. You know, that's the one that we installed. And yeah, let's go ahead and click on them. Let's see. All right, so there's a critical vulnerability, and the solution is to update the affected packages. If you guys want, you guys can go ahead and read more into this to get more information on what the vulnerabilities are. Let's go back. Oops, go to mixed. And yeah, we can just keep looking at more. Yeah, it's a lot of vulnerabilities. But chances are this can easily be remediated just by updating the software. Let's go for remediation. So it looks like, yeah, it looks like it's just saying to update. That is their best remediation strategy. So let's go ahead and do that. We're going to go ahead and open a PowerShell, and we're going to SSH into the Linux virtual machine. So 192.168. Oh my god, I'm messing up. I'm so bad at this. 2.168.1.12. We're going to put in the password, and while we were, so now here we're just going to do sudo apt update and sudo apt upgrade -y, so it wouldn't keep telling us. We're going to put in the password, and now it's going to perform an update and upgrade of the virtual machine. It may not directly upgrade to the highest version of Linux, but it will update all of the packages within it. So once this finishes installing, we're going to go ahead and run the scanner again to see if it did remediate some of the vulnerabilities. Alright, so now that it finished updating, we're just gonna do a quick reboot, make sure it, for all the settings to take into effect. Now we just wait. Once it finished rebooting, we're going to now perform a rescan to see if it remediated some of those vulnerabilities. So, let's just go back and do the scan again. Credentialed scan and hit launch. While this finishes scanning, let's go ahead and do the printer scan. We're going to do new scan, basic network scan. Let's do a printer scan. This one is a little bit more different. You do have to make a couple more configurations. Here, give me 1 second. I just need to find out what the IP address is for my printer. Alright, I'm back. So we're going to do 192.168.1.108. Now we're going to go to discovery, and then we're going to change from common ports to custom. Once you go to custom, you're going to see these settings unlock. You're going to go to host discovery, and this may not be checkmarked, so just go ahead and checkmark it because you're going to scan for network printers. If you do perform this scan, be advised, it may start printing just random gibberish because it could trigger the port that allows printing. You could disable that port in the printer settings temporarily just to avoid that, but if you do, it's totally normal. You're going to go ahead and click save. Now you have the printer scanning profile created. You could run it while this one is being run. Just be advised, it may use up more resources of the Raspberry Pi. But again, it's totally fine. So let's just do it. So it looks like the credential scan finished running, and we still have the printer scan left. But in the meantime, let's go ahead and look at the new list. So as you can see, we were in the hundreds last time, and now we brought it back down to a total of 36 vulnerabilities. So just running an update on Linux made a huge improvement. Whatever we have left, it looks like, let's check this one out. Yeah, it looks like it just needs some more updating. Yeah, if you guys are following along with this lab, feel free to look at all of the remaining vulnerabilities and see if you can remediate them. If you completed my previous vulnerability management video with Qualys, you guys would have set up a Windows 10 virtual machine. You guys can also perform a credential scan using Nessus. So if you remember the credentials of your Windows 10 virtual machine, then we can go ahead and perform a credential scan on that. We can go to new scan, basic network scan. If you guys are following along with this video, I also encourage you guys to check out all of the other types of scans that Nessus can perform to kind of get better at it. But right now I'm just showing you just the basics of Nessus. So let's put in the IP address of the virtual machine. All right, we put in the IP address. Now for the credentials, instead of SSH, we're gonna do Windows. We're gonna do password, the name of the user with admin access, put in the admin password, and click save. And it looks like the printer scan finally finished, so let's check it out. And there's a total of 26 vulnerabilities that we can address. And one of them being that the printer is using a deprecated TLS version, and it's recommended to enable either TLS 1.2 or 1.3. So we can go ahead and try and remediating that. So because the printer is using an old version of TLS, the more updated web browsers doesn't support it anymore. So we can go ahead and go on Edge and reload it in Internet Explorer mode. Let's click done. There we go. Now we can access it. Here we can go to network, put in the password of the admin profile, hit submit, security, management protocols, and yep, it looks like it is using an old version of TLS. So let's enable only TLS 1.2, and let's just enable some of these ciphers. Some of these ciphers are insecure, but if we run the scan again, it'll probably detect it, but let's just enable all of them. And there we go. With TLS 1.2 enabled, let's see if we can connect to it. Now we can. Now we run the scan to see if we remediated the TLS 1.0 vulnerability. All right, both scans finished. Let's check out the printer scan first. And yeah, it looks like the TLS 1.0 vulnerability was remediated. There are still some SSL related vulnerabilities, HTTP related vulnerabilities, and SNMP. Looks like there's a vulnerability called SNMP agent default community name. It looks like SNMP is probably enabled in the settings. Chances are you could probably disable SNMP in the settings itself, so that's not really a major issue. Let's check out the Windows 10 credential scan. Yeah, it looks like it discovered a lot of vulnerabilities. Let's check that out as well. It looks like there's some Firefox vulnerabilities. Looks like I remember I did install an old version of Firefox. The simple way to remediate this could just be either updating it or uninstalling it if it's no longer in use. Same goes with the VLC media player. Yep, it is. I remember installing an old version of VLC media player. But that's essentially the gist of Nesus Essentials. I do encourage you guys to play around with the vulnerability management tool and scan other things in your network. Maybe even try scanning the Raspberry Pi itself. See if you can identify any kind of vulnerabilities there, or even your own personal computer. See if you can perform a vulnerability scan and detect any kind of vulnerabilities in it. And that is the end of this lab. Unlike Qualys, Nessus doesn't offer some kind of certification for using this tool, but I still encourage you guys to get better at the tool, because the better you are using the tools, the more tools you learn, the more well-rounded of a professional you are, which will increase the chances of you getting into, these cybersecurity roles. If you like this video, please hit the like. If you want to see more content, please subscribe. And until then, take care.